February 24, 1986, a Monday morning in Van Nuys, Los Angeles. Sherri Rasmussen called in sick. She was not sick. She just needed a quiet day at home in the condominium she shared with her husband of 3 months. A day to herself. Ordinary. Unremarkable. The kind of day millions of people take without thinking twice. Someone knew she would be there. When John Ruetten came home from work that evening and pushed open the front door, he found his wife lying on the living room floor. She had been beaten with a vase, shot 3 times in the chest, and bitten hard enough on the arm to leave a full dental impression in her skin. The wedding ring she had worn for exactly 3 months was still on her finger. The condominium had been ransacked, drawers pulled, items thrown, in what was designed to look like a burglary gone wrong. It was not a burglary. The person who killed Sherri Rasmussen that morning had been a police officer for 2 years. She would go on to spend the next 23 years working inside the Los Angeles Police Department, advancing her career, earning commendations, going home to her family at the end of each shift, while the case of the woman she murdered sat in a cold case file in the same building where she worked. She investigated other people's crimes for a living. Before we go into this story, let us know where you are watching from. And if you want more cases like this, subscribe, because what Sherri Rasmussen's father did for 23 years alone, with no one in authority willing to listen to him, is one of the most quietly devastating things in this entire case. To understand what happened to Sherri Rasmussen, you need to understand who she was. Not as a victim. As a person. Sherri Ray Rasmussen was 29 years old in February of 1986. She had grown up in Burbank, California, the daughter of Nels and Loretta Rasmussen, a close and loving family. She was, by every account, the kind of person who fills a room, tall, athletic, warm, with the kind of presence that made the people around her feel more settled. She had put herself through school and earned her degree in nursing, and by the time of her murder she was the director of nursing at Glendale Adventist Medical Center. 29 years old and already running an entire nursing department. She taught classes at UCLA on the side. She was, in every sense, a woman who had built something real. She had met John Ruetten at California State University Northridge. They had dated, gotten serious, and in November of 1985, after years together, they got married. Sherri wore white. The photographs show a woman beaming in the particular way that people beam at the beginning of something they have worked toward for a long time. They had been married for 3 months and 1 week when she was murdered. What John Ruetten knew, and what he had not told Sherri the full extent of, was that there was another woman. Not a secret relationship. Not something ongoing. But a history. Her name was Stephanie Lazarus. Lazarus and Ruetten had met at UCLA in the late 1970s. By Ruetten's own later testimony, what existed between them was not a formal relationship, it was casual, on his part, the kind of arrangement that young men sometimes allow to continue longer than they should because it is easier than having a clear conversation. By Lazarus's understanding of it, it was something more. She had told family members that she was in love with him. She had told colleagues she expected to marry him. When Ruetten met Sherri Rasmussen and began building a serious life with her, Stephanie Lazarus did not simply move on. She joined the Los Angeles Police Department in 1983. In the weeks before the wedding in November 1985, Sherri began to notice things. She told her father, Nels, that a woman had been coming to her workplace. That the woman had confronted her, told her that she was making a mistake marrying Ruetten, that Ruetten belonged with her. Sherri described the woman as aggressive enough that she was frightened. She told her father that the woman was a police officer. She told her father the name, Stephanie Lazarus. Nels Rasmussen listened to his daughter. He registered the name. He filed it away with the instinct of a father who takes seriously what his children tell him, even when it is uncomfortable to hear. 3 months after the wedding, Sherri was dead. On the night of February 24, 1986, lab detectives arrived at the Van Nuys condominium and assessed the scene. The living room had been ransacked. A vase had been broken. 3 bullets. The car was missing. It would be found 11 days later, 2 miles away. There was a bite mark on Sherri's arm, deep and distinct, but in 1986 bite mark analysis was not yet a reliable forensic tool, and it would not be properly preserved and analyzed for another 18 years. The detectives looked at the scene and made a decision. Botched burglary. An intruder had encountered the homeowner and killed her to escape. 2 male suspects. Nels Rasmussen, still raw with grief, went to the police within weeks of the murder. He told them what Sherri had told him. He gave them the name. He told them about the confrontations, about the fear his daughter had expressed, about the police officer who had told his daughter she was making a mistake marrying Ruetten. The investigators noted it down. And then they went back to their burglary theory. This is the part of the story that is hardest to sit with, because it is not a single failure. It is a pattern of failures, repeated across 2 decades, each one compounding the last. In 1986, detectives investigated the burglary angle. They developed composite sketches of 2 male suspects based on a similar burglary that had occurred nearby. They focused on the sketches. The lead detective, Lyle Meyer, later said he had looked at Lazarus as a possible suspect and considered her cleared. But there is no record of Lazarus ever being formally interviewed about the murder in 1986. No record of her whereabouts that day being checked against evidence. She was wearing the badge of the same department running the investigation, and the department chose to believe she had nothing to do with it without doing the work to confirm that belief. Nels Rasmussen came back. He wrote letters. He requested meetings. He called. He drove to police stations and sat across from detectives who had taken over the cold case and told them, again, what his daughter had told him, again, and gave them the name, again. In 1993, when DNA testing had become available and Nels offered to pay for DNA analysis of the evidence himself, out of his own pocket, a grieving father willing to fund the investigation the police would not, he was told that the department needed a suspect before they could run DNA tests. He had given them a suspect. He had given them the same suspect for 7 years. They told him the suspect had been cleared. A former co-worker of Sherri's reached out to police in 1997 with new information, an account of the confrontation Lazarus had with Sherri at her workplace in January 1986, just 1 month before the murder. The detective who received the tip did not follow up before the witness died 3 years later. Nels Rasmussen was told, at various points across those years, that he was watching too much television. That he was a grieving father who had fixated on an innocent woman. That the police knew what they were doing and he should let them do it. He did not stop. In 2004, the LAPD's newly formed cold case unit reopened the Rasmussen file. The bite mark evidence, preserved in a freezer in the evidence room since 1986, 18 years earlier, was re-examined with modern forensic technology. The shape and size of the bite mark, combined with the fact that it appeared to have been made deliberately rather than in a defensive struggle, had always suggested to investigators with fresh eyes that the attacker was most likely a woman. The cold case unit developed a DNA profile from the saliva in the bite mark and ran it through their system. No match. The case went cold again. But the DNA profile existed now. It was waiting. In 2009, a detective named Jim Nuttall took another look at the Rasmussen file. He went back to the beginning. He spoke to Ruetten, who told him what he had already told the LAPD 23 years earlier, that Stephanie Lazarus, his former college acquaintance, had been given as a possible suspect by the family. Ruetten told Nuttall that he had provided that name in 1986. The name had never been formally documented. Nuttall built a list of 5 female suspects from Sherri's circle. 3 were immediately eliminated through DNA. A 4th, a nurse with whom Sherri had had workplace tensions, was also eliminated. The 5th was Stephanie Lazarus. Nuttall arranged for a covert surveillance team to follow Lazarus. The goal was to obtain a DNA sample without alerting her, without involving her department, and without giving her any reason to know she was being investigated. On a day when Lazarus discarded a cup she had been drinking from, surveillance officers collected it. The DNA on the cup matched the DNA from the bite mark on Sherri Rasmussen's arm. 23 years after the murder. The same bite mark that had been sitting in a freezer since 1986. The same DNA that Nels Rasmussen had been trying to get tested since 1993. The same name he had been bringing to police since within weeks of his daughter's death. The question now was how to arrest a sitting lap detective without alerting the department, without giving Lazarus time to flee or destroy anything, and without the arrest becoming a disaster before it had properly begun. On June 5, 2009, Detective Daniel Jaramillo approached Lazarus at her desk inside LAPD headquarters. He told her he needed her help downstairs. There was a man with information about stolen art, her specialty, and they needed her expertise. She had no reason to suspect anything. She was, by every outward appearance, a respected 25-year department veteran about to help on a routine matter. They took her to a room. They began to ask her questions. Not about art theft. About Sherri Rasmussen. The recorded interview that followed is one of the most extraordinary documents this case produced. Lazarus sat across from detectives who methodically walked her through the case, through the evidence, through the DNA, and through what it all meant. At one point, as the detectives laid out the evidence connecting her to the bite mark, Lazarus looked up and said, "Am I on candid camera or something? This is insane. This is absolutely crazy." She walked out of the interview room. 2 detectives were waiting in the hallway. She was handcuffed and placed under arrest for the murder of Sherri Rasmussen. Stephanie Lazarus was 50 years old. She had spent 23 years inside the LAPD since the day she murdered Sherri. She had been promoted. She had worked cases. She had carried a badge and a gun and gone home at the end of each shift to a husband and a daughter she had adopted in 2000. She had, by any external measure, built a successful life. Inside an evidence freezer, a bite mark had been waiting for her the entire time. Her trial began in February 2012. The DNA evidence from the bite mark was the center of the prosecution's case. Lazarus's .38 caliber backup gun, which she had reported as lost to the Santa Monica Police Department, not to the LAPD, as regulations required, 2 weeks after the murder, was identified as the likely source of the bullets. The prosecution presented evidence that she had taken a personal day on the day of the murder. They presented the timeline of the attack, the vase, the struggle, the 3 shots fired through a pillow used as a makeshift silencer, the staged ransacking, and argued that every element pointed to a killer who knew how crime scenes were investigated, because she investigated them for a living. The defense argued the original burglary theory. They pointed to the similar burglary that had occurred nearby. They challenged the DNA evidence. They argued that the case against Lazarus was built on circumstantial connections rather than direct proof. On March 8, 2012, the jury found Stephanie Lazarus guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 27 years to life. At the sentencing, the prosecutor read a statement into the record that described Lazarus's narcissism as the engine of everything that had happened. The statement said that her profound narcissism led her to kill and continues to motivate her denial of responsibility. That her unrepentant selfishness poses a real and significant danger to any person whose interests conflict with her egotistic desires. In 2023, Lazarus applied for parole. The hearing produced the first public confession she had ever offered. She told the board that she was sorry. That it made her sick to think about what she had done. That she had taken an oath to protect and serve and instead had taken Sherri Rasmussen's life. The parole was initially granted by a commissioner. California Governor Gavin Newsom intervened, raising concerns that Lazarus had evaded justice for more than 2 decades and had not appeared to begin taking genuine accountability until after she was caught. The parole was rescinded. At a subsequent hearing in 2024, the board found her unsuitable for release again. She remains in prison. Nels Rasmussen, Sherri's father, spent nearly a quarter-century telling police the name of his daughter's killer and being told he was wrong. He was not wrong. He was right from the beginning. The system did not fail to find Stephanie Lazarus because there were no clues. It failed because it was not willing to investigate one of its own, and because a grieving father was easier to dismiss than a sitting police officer was to examine. This case leaves 3 things that every person watching needs to carry with them. The first is about what an institution will protect when it is forced to choose between its reputation and the truth. The LAPD's failure to investigate Lazarus in 1986 was not an accident of insufficient evidence. Sherri had told her father about the confrontations. Nels had given police the name within weeks of the murder. The bite mark on Sherri's arm had indicated from the beginning that the attacker was most likely a woman, which should have redirected the burglary theory that was collapsing anyway. The department chose not to follow those threads. And it chose, repeatedly, for 23 years, not to revisit that choice. The system that was supposed to find Sherri Rasmussen's killer was the same system that employed her killer, and the conflict of interest embedded in that fact was never honestly addressed until a detective with fresh eyes in 2009 decided to actually do the work. The second is about Nels Rasmussen. He knew. He knew in 1986 because his daughter had told him. He gave the police a name. He came back. He wrote letters. He offered money for testing. He sat across from detectives who told him he was watching too much television, and he went home and came back again. He never stopped. For 23 years, while Stephanie Lazarus went to work and built a career and received commendations and raised a child, Nels Rasmussen kept bringing his daughter's name back into rooms where people did not want to hear it. That kind of sustained, quiet refusal to accept injustice is not celebrated the way dramatic courtroom moments are. But it is the reason this case was ever solved. The DNA matched because Nels had kept the pressure alive long enough for the right detective to finally apply it. The third is about Sherri. She had told her father she was frightened. She had told him about the confrontations at her workplace. She had given him a name. She was a 29-year-old woman at the beginning of a marriage she had worked toward for years, afraid enough of another woman's behavior to talk about it with her family, and not protected in any way by the system that was supposed to protect people. The bite mark on her arm was the last evidence of how hard she fought to survive. It was there the entire time, waiting to say what she could not. It just needed someone willing to listen. The way Nels had always been willing to listen. Sherri Rasmussen was 29 years old on February 24, 1986. She had been married for 3 months. She had taken a day at home and called in sick when she was not sick. She was there when someone who knew she would be there came to the door. She fought. She bit back. She left a mark. That mark waited 23 years. And when the science finally caught up to it, it said everything that needed to be said. If you have watched this far, leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. And if you think Sherri Rasmussen deserved better than what the system gave her, share this video. Because the least we can do is make sure her name is remembered for who she was, not just for what was done to her.